But really, as soon as humans became self-aware and began to ask questions like, why am I here? And what happens after I die? From that point on, humans started to wrestle with the concept of God, of some sort of power greater than themselves who had an influence on their lives. But let's get back to the idea of why God. Once again, a generic term for anything greater than us. But why did this idea of God show up once groups got larger than 150 people? The answer is that individuals can't really know more than 150 people. Any more than that, having groups larger than 150 people, well, you aren't able to know everybody, so you don't always know what everyone is up to. There might be some people out there trying to cheat the system, as it were. Professor Sharif says, when you start having anonymous strangers in a group, when you start having people whose reputations you're unfamiliar with, what that means is that people can get a free ride on that group. They can cheat the group with impunity. And when you start having large groups of free riders and cheaters in any group, it can't sustain itself. You need a level of cooperation between the people in a group for it to act and to work harmoniously. And as groups grow and trade networks are established, being able so you can trust the other person that you're trading with, well, that becomes another reason why people start to believe in God, start to believe in this concept of God, because all of a sudden, once you know that the other person that you're dealing with is also a God-fearing believer like you are, it is sufficient to act as a cue of trust. Oh, sure, there is that God-fearing part of religion as well, which has been used by those in authority to shape and control populations as well, and has been seen in all religions, from the ancient Mesopotamians to Scientologists. But we're not talking about that today. I want us to think about why the idea of God showed up. And why? Well, it's about trust, but trust and relationships. Two things that I think all of us can understand, especially in this past year. Think of all the people whom you put your trust in this past year. Your family members, people who are in your pod, whether that pod is the church pod that we created or your pod of friends where you all agreed that you would all quarantine and be in relationship, but you wouldn't go out and interact with other folks. Maybe the person you trusted most this past year was Dr. Fauci. And as much as there were a group of people that you trusted, there were probably also a group of people that you didn't trust and probably still don't trust. And that is because you didn't have a real relationship with them. There were those who you recognized as being part of your tribe, by blood, by class, by religion, by race, or by opinion. Because of those things, you felt safe with them and them with you. You were probably also able to influence them, and they were probably able to influence you. Now imagine if God was like that. Imagine that God was as influenced by you as you were by God. That's the basis of something called process theology, a religious concept which is one of many strands in Unitarian Universalist belief. And don't worry about the word theology, which I know means the study of God, but just think about it as meaning process, that this is a process thought, process understanding of the sacred. The use of relationships is the basis of reality and process theology. Where a Western view of reality is that the world is made up of objects, building blocks, that you can break down into smaller and smaller bits. Think cells and atoms and electrons. Or you can turn them around and start with electrons and going to atoms and cells, and you can start building more and more complex things out of these blocks. It's a very mechanical view of the world. In process thought, the world is based on relationships. Right? Reality is based on how all of these different blocks are related to one another. The atom is in relationship to the cell is in relationship to tissue is in relationship to organisms are in relationship to society, and so on and so on. It doesn't reject the idea of building blocks, but it minimizes their importance. What matters is how these blocks are in relationship. Life did not begin on our planet because of all of these separate elements, but because there was chemistry that brought them together and made them interact and relate to one another. Our relationships with the environment and with people around us shape who we are. Relationships created you, and if the foundation of reality is relational, then it is less certain and the past is not quite so powerful, because any new relationship can come in and change the outcome of the future. In process theology, this means that God is not outside of time, unchanged by time. Instead, God is in relationship with people and all living creatures. And all of our experiences become a part of God. And God is changed by those experiences. The future then is in process, and thus we become co-creators with God. There is no predestination. God may be a lure towards the good, but God is not absolute. Process theology tosses out that Platonic ideal that God is the representation of perfection. That idea that what God is the opposite of what people are, right? God is unchanging, and people are changing. God is good, and we are sometimes good, but never as good as God. And thus God is defined as the opposite to what humans are. And that is what made God, God. What does it feel like for you to think about God not in personal terms, but instead being a process, about being a relationship that you are a part of? The Reverend Jill McAllister says that God is the potential for right relationship. I should also say that process theology works without God as well. It removes the lure and a certain centrality, but it's easy to see how reality is unrolling in certain ways and that the future is shaped by relationships. I love this idea that this is all shaped by relationships, because it means that we have some agency in the future. It means that our relationships that we have are really important. It also reminds me a little bit of what of the process that Greg Boyd spoke about here a few weeks ago. Remember, Greg was talking about the process that of Unitarian Universalism, of the Unitarian Universalist Association, to update our principles and purposes, right? Because, and the reason we are able to do this is because we come from a covenantal tradition, right? We have a covenant. Each Unitarian Universalist congregation has a covenant that everyone who is in relationship with each other, that they create, they write, and then we all agree to it. And over time, we might have to change those things, right? And that's what Greg was saying, is that we get to update the language of the Unitarian Universalist principles and purposes, making them more relevant, making them anti-racist. All of that is about how our relationships shape the future. How we understand the idea of God shapes the way we see each other, how we see the world, how we understand reality. And with that in mind, let me read to you the second half of the poem, God Went to Beauty School. I think it's a great way to end my sermon. God got really into nails, of course, because he'd always loved hands. Hands were some of the best things he'd ever done. And this way he could just hold on to one and admire those delicate bones just above the knuckles, delicate as bird wings. And after he'd done that a while, he could paint the nails any color he wanted and then say, beautiful, and mean it. Beautiful.
And now please join me in singing our first hymn and our only hymn. This is our song. Every summer service this summer, we are trying as a community to widen our understanding and experiences by sharing our thoughts with each other about our sermon topic. So Reverend Peirce in his reflections spent some time talking about how God appears when we live in communities. And he later reminded us that we, as you used, are a covenantal faith. We choose as individuals the path of our own spiritual journey, but we covenant to help one another so all souls can grow into harmony with the divine. So I would like everyone to take a moment to contemplate this question. How does your relationship with God or the holy or the sacred influence your covenant or covenants? We may consider ourselves having more than one. We look at our affirmation and our purposes and principles, including the 8th principle that we recently adopted. How does your relationship with God influence your covenants with the community of First Parish in Lexington? And what we are going to do is go into breakout sessions, and we are going to be there for about, well, not about, for about exactly 10 minutes. So, and then we will come back. So please share with each other your thoughts, and the question will, I think, also appear in the chat. Well, this is the time that we can just chat among ourselves.
So they can't hear us. They're in breakout rooms right now.
Yeah, in breakout rooms. But actually, I'm not sure if it's going. I don't know what shows up in the stream, so maybe we should not talk. Welcome back, everybody. Now, let's please take a moment in prayer and meditation. I want to share with you these words by Lori Walk. Can we just sit here for a moment, Holy One? Some of us are carrying pretty heavy stuff, and we all could just use a moment of peace to count our breath, to quiet the noise, to let our spirits be still. Perhaps as we sit, we will count our blessings. Name them, one by one. And when we have left in us, and when all we have left in us is a moment of silence, help us trust that that is enough. You'll take care of the rest. Amen. So, if you have any joys or sorrows, I would like you to share them with the community by putting them in the chat window. And this is also the time during our service where we receive our tithes and offerings to support the mission and vision of First Parish in Lexington. We are incredibly grateful to all those who give regularly and generously. You can, of course, also use the link that you'll find in the chat window. Our offertory today is played by Peter Svensson. He is playing Clair de Lune by Debussy. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is our service for today. I hope that you will join us again next week. We have services every Sunday, and we have programming also going on that you can find out about at fplex.org. So we will have our coffee hour, and after you see the slides go by, and I hope to see you again soon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Elisabeth.